to do with a big waterlogged 1,000-pound moose? Well, I had that dilemma that I had to face. I'm standing on Little Elmore Lake up in northern Vermont, gazing out with my binoculars, watching a bunch of flies and maggots fall off this moose. And I'd gotten a call just earlier that day. A bunch of fishermen had been out there fishing for trout, and they weren't real happy to have this smelly moose out there. They wanted something done. So I'm out there looking at it and thinking, what the heck am I going to do? And then I remembered, about 10 years before, when I was a rookie game warden, I'd been called over to Lake Champlain to help the guys on opening day of duck season. My district was in the mountains, didn't have many ducks. Lake Champlain had a lot of ducks. So I was glad to go over and volunteer to help out. We worked all day, and that evening we were at my supervisor's house, a guy named Bill Wheatley Wheelock, and he liked to make homemade wine. But he had a problem. You can only keep 50 gallons of wine or you need a license for it. So he was always trying to get people to drink his wine. And he made it out of most everything, but the type that I really liked was made out of tomatoes. Don't ask me why that tasted good, but it was pretty good. So anyway, a bunch of us wardens are hanging around after dinner. We'd already debriefed what we found during the opening day, people we'd talked to, and where we were going to work the next day. And we started to drift into stories. And Howard Brown was a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he was holding court at that moment. He'd been a warden in northern Maine, and he was describing how he'd gotten a call about a rotten moose in a waterway up in his district. And the camp owners and fishermen were complaining about the smell. And he got up there and looked it over and came up with a really good method to get rid of it. It involved a lot of dynamite. And he made it sound pretty easy. He says, you know, I got that dynamite, blew that moose up, problem solved, no problem. And I'm thinking here, I'm a young guy, I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty cool. That'd be really neat to blow up a moose. The only problem was, in the early 70s, we didn't have any moose over in my area. There was a few starting to filter into the Northeast Kingdom from northern New Hampshire and Quebec, but they hadn't made it to my district yet. Well, here was my chance 10 years later. And I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So I knew it was on the edge of my district with the warden out of East Montpelier. And I knew he had a son-in-law who was in the construction business. So I thought, you know, maybe he has access to dynamite. Because they didn't issue dynamite to wardens anymore. Some of the old-timers had some problems with dynamite. So, but they hadn't banned us from using it either. So that meant to me we could do it. So I called up Ron Gagne that evening when I got home, and I said, Ron, I said, we got a problem. I kind of included him in the problem here. And I said, we've got a big old cow moose floating in Little Elmore, and I'm thinking that the way to get it out of there is to blow it up. He said, oh yeah? And I said, yeah, I think that would work really well. He says, you have any access to dynamite? He says, well, yeah. He says, I think I might. I'll make a few phone calls and let you know. I said, okay, I'll wait for your call. Sure enough, he calls me back, and he's sounding pretty excited now. He said, yep. He says, my brother-in-law's got some dynamite, and he wants to know how many sticks we want. How many sticks do we want? I had no idea how many sticks we wanted. He says, you know, you think 4 would be good? I said, yeah, that sounds real good. 4 would be great. He says, okay. He says, I'll call him back and get it, and I can get all the stuff. You know, I can get the caps, and I'll get the fuse wire, the whole bit. I said, all right. I've got a nice lightweight canoe, because we're going to have to carry it in about a half mile, and I'll get a rope and stuff like that. And how about if we meet around 6 o'clock tomorrow morning at the little access off Route 12? I said, sure. Okay, sounds good. So next morning, bright and early, we meet up there. Ron gets out of his cruiser and he says, well, Eric, he says, I got good news and bad news. Okay, what's the good news? Well, I got the dynamite. All right. I said, that's great. I said, what's the bad news? Well, he says, we've only got 35 feet of fuse wire. 35 feet of fuse wire. How long is 35 feet? And I'm starting to calculate. I said, well, that's about 11 yards, and you know, a pitcher's mound is about 60 feet. And I'm thinking, oh man, I really want to do this. And he said, do you think that'll be enough? And I said, yep, that ought to be great. No problem at all. Okay, so we hot-footed through the woods, get down on the edge of the pond, and it's a beautiful, still morning, you know, classic Vermont day, you know, Vermont life kind of, you know, calendar thing, except for this moose that's out there floating high, all kinds of bugs falling off it. And I'm actually thinking, you know, this might be a chance to test that theory about, you know, using dynamite to catch trout. That we might actually turn up lunch here too, along with this moose. So anyway, we get the boat in, and I get Ron in the bow of it, and he said, boy, he says, you know, this canoe is pretty little. I said, yeah, well, you know, it's a 22-pound racing canoe. It's only about 22 inches wide in the middle, and there's only one seat. But, you know, if you keep your paddle in the water and don't move much, we should have no problem getting out there. So I get him in the bow of the boat, and I hop in the stern. We paddle out to the moose. And Ron says to me, he says, you think we ought to use all 4 sticks right away? And I said, well, you know, and I'm thinking about this 35 feet of wire. I said, well, maybe we ought to go with 2. You know, we can always use the other 2 later if we need to. So Ron says, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So he rigs up, gets the caps out, sinks them in the dynamite, stabs the moose, puts one in the chest area, one down in the abdomen, and we start backing off with the wire. Well, I'm telling you, 35 feet of wire out in the middle of a pond ain't very far. I mean, it's not even as far as towards the back of this room here. And the other problem was, as we tightened the wire up, this moose starts floating towards us. Because you know, moose, just like all the critters in the deer family, have got hollow hair. And of course, he's all bloated, or she is, so it's floating high. And I don't know, this doesn't look real good at all. And I can tell Ron's getting a tad bit worried. He's a guy, he was maybe 10 years older than me, so he's been around the block a few times, and I think he was beginning to wonder if I really knew what the heck I was talking about, which obviously I didn't. But, so when he says to me, Ron turns to me, and the canoe sort of gives it a little shake, you know, so he's a little bit like this. And he says, you sure we ought to do this? And I'm thinking, that's a real good question. But I wasn't going to let him know. I said, I'm thinking to myself, we've gotten into this, we're in this far, we're going to do it. And the other thought I had too was, well, you know, I'm going to face the boat right towards the moose, which means that Ron is actually 7 or 8 feet closer to me. So I'm really almost at 42 feet. And Ron is between me and the moose, sort of like a blast shield, you know, kind of deal. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, this is good. This is good. No problem, Ron. This is going to work great. So Ron gets out his little D battery. You don't need much to set off caps for dynamite. And I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to back up slow, and I'm going to count to 3, and that's when you touch it off, and we're going to time it so that we're at maximum distance before that moose starts cuddling up to us here. He said, all right. So I start doing a slow backstroke. Line starts pulling up. I said, 3. Well, I know that had to be a deafening roar. But to tell you the truth, I never heard it. I didn't hear any noise at all. And it was quite amazing how everything slowed down. It was like a slow motion movie from that point on. And looking over Ron's shoulder, I see this column of stuff going up in the air. And it's sort of slowly rising, you know, very majestically. And then it gets to the high as it's going to go, and it starts to form, you know, kind of that, looks like a mushroom-shaped cloud kind of deal. And then it starts to hail, or seem like hail, stuff down on us. Except it's not frozen water. This is a wonderful assortment of rotten moose meat, hair, gut material, water, probably a few stunned looking fish, although I didn't notice them at the moment. And it just rains this stuff on us. And then this blast of smell hits us. You know, at first it wasn't all that smelly because it was all kind of contained with the skin and stuff. But man, when we blew it, that was something else. And I look at Ron, who's in front of me, and I see this stuff sort of dripping off his hat and all over his back, you know. So it was sort of like these victims, you know, that have been around, you know, when Mount St. Helens blew up kind of deal, you know, except it's not volcanic ash. But the good news was we didn't get a tsunami off it. I was a little worried about that. So even though we had the canoe facing the right way to take a good wave, we were in good shape there. But, you know, it just, then everything kind of settled down, and I look around and we're surrounded by this scum of rotten stuff. And I'm thinking, we gotta get out of here, this is terrible. And I said, okay, we did what we could, but I look over at the moose, which I was hoping was not there at all, but half of it was still there. We'd essentially blown the whole top off. And it was smoking. It looked a little like one of those Ken Burns movies, you know, the after the battle, and there was all this smoke coming up. And that's what that moose looked like. So, I said, we've got to do something with this darn moose. And Ron said, well, maybe we can bust it up with the other 2 sticks. And I'm thinking, oh man, we can do this again. So what we ended up doing, we kind of hung the sticks of dynamite off the back of it. And it was not nearly so spectacular, thank goodness. But we did manage to drag the hunks out. And I had to lug the head back because the biologist wanted to check for brain worm and all that kind of stuff. We get back up at my vehicle, and we tried to clean ourselves off as best we could. We get to the vehicle, I get this smelly moose head that I throw in the back of my truck. And when I opened the door of the truck, I noticed that I packed a nice lunch. And you know, being game wardens, we're kind of used to some pretty nasty stuff, and I had a really bad reputation for having kind of nasty lunches too that might have been in there for a couple months or a couple weeks. But anyway, I said to Ron, I made some really good lunch this morning. It's really fresh. He says, you interested? And he kind of looked at me funny, and he said, well, what do you got? I said, well, I've got some really good moose sandwiches. He said, no thanks. He jumps in his cruiser, and as he's driving away, I noticed that he's rolling down the window. And I like to think that he gave me a nice friendly wave goodbye, but I'm a little worried it wasn't great that. Thank you very much.